All right. Good early morning to everybody. Let's go ahead and get us some background music going. Yes, fair use, fair use. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what's going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. Welcome to another episode of A Value Conversation, Gen X Spoken Word. All right, so I'm continuing on this little bit of wake-up call that I'm giving to everyone who's not been paying attention about what's going on in the world right now. And that is literally the Trump administration trying to erase out the existence of Black contribution to America. So you've met my partner, Derek. You've met my partner, Carvey. They both have something to say about what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on right about now into the next phase of the conversation. And that's going to take a look at why is it that Donald Trump is saying that the Smithsonian exhibit of African American heritage or culture is racial, divisive, and attempting to rewrite history. So rather than me sit around here and just go off on this, let's go ahead and get started. You know what, better yet, let me back up for a second. Let me give some context to this. So if I said something crazy, you guys would be able to recognize it and you'd probably say something, right? Well, I hope you would. Now, FYI, again, just to let folks know, if you're watching this right now and it's part of the replay game, as always, guys, I appreciate you. Now, I don't have anybody who's here right now, but that doesn't really matter to me because the thing here is that I'm getting the information out. So whether anyone joins me right now or they join me later, the basic thing is that the information is there for you to review. Not to mention, I've got to get my watch hours out of the way anyway, right? So whether I do it pre-recorded or whether or not I do it live, if anyone shows up, great. If not, just catch it on the replay and give me your comments and tell me what you think. All right, so as I was saying, if I were to say something ridiculous, I'd expect somebody to call me out for it. All right, so let me give you this offering right here. The reason I don't like to play golf is every time I swing my club, the ground keeps getting in the way. All right, let me throw that back one more time. The reason I don't like to play golf is every time I swing my club, the ground keeps getting in the way. All right, so here's the second ridiculous thing I'm going to say. See if you pick up on this. Blacks were more together and united under slavery and under segregation. All right, I'll throw it back at you again. Blacks were more united as a family under slavery and segregation. All right, so take a second to let that drop in because this is that type of foolishness that I want everyone to look at and see how it's presented and how things can be distorted if clarity is not given. All right, so let's go back to the first example where I said that the reason why I don't like playing golf is every time I swing my club, the ground gets in the way. So essentially what I'm doing is trying to blame the ground for my poor ability to make contact with the ball. So it's the ground's fault is basically what I'm saying in this ridiculous scenario of why I can't hit the ball. Now that sounds silly as hell, right? And so it should. So now let's take a look at the second example I gave where I stated the Black family was more united under slavery and segregation. Now, depending upon who you hear this from, right? Depending on who you hear this from, someone would think there is merit to that, but there is no merit to this. This is a mischaracterization. Essentially, it's disinformation. Now, if we were to look at it from the perspective that I'm going to explain it right now, it makes better sense. The reason why Black families were more united under slavery and under segregation is because they were under a constant threat of danger. They were under siege. You didn't know if you walked out of that front door of that cabin or that house if someone was going to come back. You didn't know if someone was going to throw some type of Molotov cocktail through the window. You didn't know if someone was going to set fire to the house. You didn't know if someone was going to kick the door open to the house, run in, shoot you while you're in the house, or run in, take you outside, shoot you, then hang you, or come inside, pull the family out, restrain the father, and then someone would have their way with his wife or his daughters in front of the father. So therefore, if blacks were more united during slavery and segregation, it was not because of this benevolent life that the master was giving them. It was not because of the fact they were happy being enslaved and working on the plantation. It was because of the constant threat of death, rape, murder, maiming, lynching, shooting, you name it. That is why the black family was more united under slavery and segregation. So don't let anyone tell you this bullshit about us being more together. And this even goes for Jim Crow as well. We were not united because of Jim Crow being good to us. It was, again, because of the constant fear of death. All right, now that I've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get on with what I want to discuss. Let's do a larger screen here. There we go. I like that one. All right. So as I said before, Trump has got it in his mind for whatever reason that the information that is shown at the Smithsonian as well as the Boston Museum, which is also highlighting African-American exhibitions, is divisive and it's race-centered and it is more or less trying to rewrite history. So let's take a look at something. Let's go ahead and scroll through this. President Trump accused the Smithsonian Institution of propagating divisive race-based ideology and issued an executive order Thursday demanding an end to federal funding for exhibitions and programs based on racial themes that divide Americans. The order, titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, directs Vice President J.D. Vance to remove improper ideology from the Smithsonian's 19 museums and the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. Trump's order also seeks to restore Department of the Interior public monuments and statues that were removed or changed to perpetuate a false reconstruction of American history, inappropriately minimize the value of certain historical events or figures, or include any other improper partisan ideology. All right, so any of you who've been following this little series that I've been doing here knows right off the bat that this is a bald-faced damn lie. But the question is, why is Trump so invested in this? What is it that he believes is the truth versus the recorded history that everybody else knows of? Now, if any of you may recall here, I did a stint inside of the series here on the Daughters of the Confederacy. Now, again, the Daughters of the Confederacy, they're an organization that more or less romanticizes and supports the lost cause narrative, which is that the South was a wonderful place to be in. The Southern gentlemen who fought in the war were heroic, and all the women were very of chastity and support and dedication to their men. And the whole benefit of, I don't know why I'm calling it a benefit, but to them, the whole benefit of this was to downplay the fact that Southern life was for slaves very barbaric, very dangerous, murderous, even so to speak. But yet it was presented by the lost cause, again, as I mentioned before, that blacks loved the life that they lived and that they were completely emboldened to massa. But that is the lie that was told to make the Southerners feel better about the loss that they endured from the North. But again, I say it, why does Donald Trump believe that history is being rewritten? It's because of the fact that the Daughters of the Confederacy actually had the chance to rewrite history after the loss of the Civil War by the South to the North. So just as a refresher here, let me give you guys a look of, take a quick look at the Daughters of Confederacy. But before we do that, I take that back. Let me show you this executive order. Let's not do that one. Okay, this one works also. But let's take a look at that executive order that Donald Trump signed. All right, so here it is: restoring truth and sanity to American history. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Section 1, Purpose and Policy. Over the past decade, Americans have witnessed a concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth. This revisionist movement seeks to undermine the remarkable achievements of the United States by casting its founding principles and historical milestones in a negative light. Under this historical revision, our nation's unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty, individual rights, and human happiness is reconstructed as inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed. I'm gonna break here for a second here. This whole line right here talking about inherently racist, sexist, and oppressive. When and how often have we seen Donald Trump behave in a racist, a sexist, and oppressive manner? We have seen that continually, have we not? So reading this for yourselves or hearing me read it to you, how much hypocrisy are we dealing with right now? Let's continue. Rather than fostering unity and a deeper understanding of our shared past, the widespread effort to rewrite history deepens societal divides and fosters a sense of national shame, disregarding the progress America has made and the ideals that continue to inspire millions around the globe. Obviously, Donald Trump did not write this. So I'm sure Stephen Miller, Robert Vaught, or any other various folks who work behind the scenes more or less wrote this with the intent of having it seem as if Trump was able to come up with such words, right? We know the truth. The prior administration advanced this corrosive ideology at Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where our nation declared that all men are created equal. The prior administration sponsored training by an organization that advocates dismantling Western foundations and interrogating institutional racism, and pressured National Historical Park rangers that their racial identity should dictate how they convey history to visiting Americans because America is purportedly racist. Yes, America is purportedly racist. It is racist. And I will be demonstrating all that to you guys very soon. Once widely respected as a symbol of American excellence and a global icon of cultural achievement, the Smithsonian Institution has, in recent years, come under the influence of a divisive, race-centered ideology. This shift has promoted narratives that portray American and Western values as inherently harmful and oppressive. For example, the Smithsonian American Art Museum today features The Shape of Power, stories of race and American sculpture, an exhibit representing that societies, including the United States, have used race to establish and maintain systems of power, privilege, and disenfranchisement. The exhibit further claims that sculpture has been a powerful tool in promoting scientific racism and promotes the view that race is not a biological reality, but a social construct, stating race is a human invention. Can't say it's wrong. The National Museum of African American History and Culture has proclaimed that hard work, individualism, and the nuclear family are aspects of white culture. The forthcoming Smithsonian American Women's History Museum plans on celebrating the exploits of male athletes participating in women's sports. These are just a few examples. It is the policy of my administration to restore federal sites dedicated to history, including parks and museums, to solemn and uplifting public monuments that remind Americans of our extraordinary heritage, consistent progress toward becoming a more perfect union, an unmatched record of advancing liberty, prosperity, and human flourishing. Museums in our nation's capital should be places where individuals go to learn, not to be subjected to ideological indoctrination, or divisive narratives that distort our shared history. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the plug right there because there's a lot to be read here, but I just wanted to get those basic sentiments out in front of everyone right from the get-go, all right? So with that being said, now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stuff that Donald Trump just said, which, okay, that is a lie. So here where it talks about hard work, as far as being aspects of white culture. Now, if everyone can see here, here's some information looking at or explaining what was actually being said, because again, distortion was running amok in just that first section of what we read of the executive order that Donald Trump put out here. Now, keep in mind what I mentioned about how things can be distorted. First example, the reason why I stopped or I do not like playing golf is because when I swing my club, the ground gets in the way. Now, we can see there's a bit of a distortion or embellishment on the part, to whereas I'm not taking responsibility of me having a poor golf swing. Therefore, I'm driving the club directly into the ground. That's all on me, obviously. But you can see where the distortion comes in place. The second example, the Black family was more united under slavery and segregation. So as I mentioned before, that is a mischaracterization of what was going on. If they were more close-knit and together, it was because, again, as I mentioned before, of being under siege and the constant threat of death, rape, maiming, murder, hanging, lynching, you name it. That is why the Black family was so close together, because of the fear of losing a family member, not because of the fact that the South was so benevolent and life was great. So this is what Antonio McDonald is doing, is giving more perspective of what Trump left out of what he put inside of the executive order. As noted by Antonio McDaniel, the reliance of African-American families on kinship networks for financial, emotional, and social support can be traced back to African cultures, where the emphasis was on extended families rather than the nuclear family. So as you can see, there was no animosity that was being given here. It was just being stated how Black culture interacted with each other and how the family structure was put forward, as opposed to the concept of the nuclear family, which in and of itself did not come to be until later on. I believe it was the Industrial Revolution. But don't quote me on that. I'll go ahead, and I should have this in here that we can take a look at momentarily. But here we go. Where did the nuclear family come from? All right, so you can see here the nuclear family as a distinct social structure did not emerge overnight. While smaller family units have existed throughout history, the concept of the nuclear family as a prominent social unit gained traction during the Industrial Revolution and early 20th century. The term nuclear family itself was coined in the 20s by Bronislaw Malinowski, a founder of social anthropology. So obviously you can see here the phrase that I used to pull up this information. So if you want, folks, you can go back and take a look at it yourselves to get an idea of the concept behind the nuclear family. So you can see here that it was something that happened to have come along in the 1920s or so. So when you hear people talk about the nuclear family, it's not something that's been around for 200-300 years, anything like that. It's relatively a new construct. But the way that Trump presented it, it made it seem as if it was something negative that was being said based upon the African-American culture and how it approaches family life. A little bit of a difference, but nothing here that was being detrimental, stating that the nuclear family sucks. All right, so another deal here I just wanted to make mention of, the National Museum. Let's take a look at this. The National Museum of African American History and Culture is a place that celebrates the history and contributions of African Americans, and it acknowledges the importance of hard work and perseverance in their struggles and triumphs. The museum itself is a testament to hard work, dedication, and collaborative efforts from its conception to its construction and ongoing operations. So here we see information regarding the museum as a symbol, a legacy of hard work. The museum acknowledges the significant role that hard work has played in the advancement and resilience of African Americans throughout history. Here we go, talking about collaboration. So we saw that hard work, dedication, all that was mentioned, but nowhere in here do you see this as being an insult or a mention of individualism. Where was that? Now, if it was in documentation that I haven't seen, then let me know if anyone happens to take a look at that. But as you can see right now, hard work was mentioned. We discussed the fact of where the idea of the nuclear family not being a part of African culture came from. We saw that there was no animosity in having this explained. But as you can see, the information presented in this executive order by Trump is very antagonistic, but that's his style. It's nothing that we've not grown familiar with over the course of his lifetime, if you've been alive long enough to know the exploits of Donald Trump. All right, moving on. But before we do this, let's use this one. So I have made mention before about the Daughters of the Confederacy. And as I've said before, this is a group that romanticizes the Southern aspect, or should I say, if we use code words, the heritage of the South. Again, code words. So rather than me give my explanation, which covers it, let me just go ahead and give some specifics here again of what was discussed. United Daughters of the Confederacy, American Woman's Patriotic Society, founded in Nashville, Tennessee on September 10th, 1894, that draws its members from the descendants of those who served in the Confederacy's armed forces or government, or who gave either to their loyal and substantial private support. Its chief purpose is broadly commemorative and historical, to preserve and mark sites, to gather historical records and other material, to celebrate historical occasions, and by offering prizes to encourage student essays on the historic South. The UDC played a central role in spreading and perpetuating the lost cause interpretation of the American Civil War, which downplays or dismisses slavery as a cause of the war, and instead emphasizes states' rights as the reason for secession, and which has been used to serve the goals of white supremacists. The UDC was instrumental in ensuring that the characterization of the war in textbooks conformed to the lost cause narrative, and it was a prime contributor to the creation of the Confederate memorial landscape of statues and monuments that became increasingly controversial in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. All right, so stepping back up, what I'm doing right now is laying that foundation so you can get an understanding of why Donald Trump says everything that he does. So in a nutshell, Donald Trump's whole perspective of history subscribes to what the Daughters of the Confederacy have been able to do since 1894, which is rewrite history. Now, how ridiculous is this that the losers are determining the path of history? He who controls the printed page controls the information of the age. Now, I'm paraphrasing that from a Dr. Ray Hagan's statement that he put out here. But what is being shown here is that even though the North won by pulling the Union troops out of the South at the end of Reconstruction, or should I say, thereby ending Reconstruction, the antebellum South was able to claim back everything that they lost in those short 11 years. Now, in those 11 years, as I mentioned before, you had Black excellence that was seen in government, in medicine, in entrepreneurship. There were Black-owned businesses that came to prominence, as I mentioned previously, inside of just 11 years. And as soon as the troops were moved out, the blacks were again forced back into a life of subjugation. The entire time that the Reconstruction period was going on, there was still, even after Reconstruction ended and going into the 20th century, there was still operations behind the scene going into effect to ensure that the Southern way of life was going to be advanced, lost or not. So that we need to put that on the Union forces. They should have, as Carvey said, kept their foot on the pedal. All right, they should have kept their foot on the gas. But by making that Faustian bill to whereas Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, was declared the winner of the presidency in the election of 1876, I believe. Yeah, in 1876, because he was declared the winner, the deal was, if we let you, this is the Southern Democrats, if we let the Republicans claim the presidency, all we want is Union troops out of the South. And as soon as they did that, we're back in the same situation we started. Although they could not utilize slavery anymore, they could use segregation. And that was based on separate but equal. All right, so how about we start putting some faces to these folks who were part of the Daughters of the Confederacy, or should I say some of the programs that came from the Daughters of the Confederacy. Now, keep in mind now, the Daughters of the Confederacy spend a lot of time, or spent, and to this day still spend some time, but more so in the background, making sure that anything that can bolster the lost cause narrative, it's done. The majority of the statues that you see nowadays dedicated to Confederate soldiers were put up after the Civil War as a means of letting those Southerners understand that we're still here. We haven't gone anywhere. But as long as you believe in your heart that what we did during the course of the war was just and righteous, the South will always be that special place that you think of. Another key word or coded word, heritage. Where does it come from? The ignorance that has been on display of late. In the collage photos of white men, now elected officials, in blackface. In the simulated Klan lynchings for yearbook laughs. In mischaracterizations of black slaves as indentured servants. Now remember, Florida tried to do that a few years ago. In the denials that slavery was the central cause of the Civil War. One answer is from the 69,706,756, and what they don't say are students who actually learned the textbook's basic version of the lost cause, which is this distorted history. That's how many students were enrolled in the South's public elementary and secondary schools between 1889, when the government began counting students, and 1969, the height of the segregationist Jim Crow era, according to the U.S. Department of Education statistics. There they were subjected to the alternative reality of the lost cause, a false version of U.S. history developed in response to Reconstruction that minimizes slavery's central role in the Civil War, promotes the Confederacy's aim as a heroic one, glorifies the Ku Klux Klan, and portrays the white South as the victim. So a lot of what I've been saying over the course of 3 or 4 videos, you're going to hear directly from this information. So some of this might sound familiar, and it may get to be drudging at some point, but it doesn't mean that it is not factual. Again, these are these things that we need to make sure that are heard and understood. Because when Donald Trump or anyone from his particular party says, hey, we are dealing with people trying to rewrite history. No, we're not rewriting history. And I say, when I say we, I'm talking about folks who have actually followed the correct history that is out here and annotated. Anyone who says that, the radical left is trying to rewrite history, those are folks who subscribe to this lost narrative that we're discussing right now. These are the folks who are wrong. But because of the fact that, again, the Union did not keep their foot on the pedal, or what did I say? They're spurred to the horse or something like that. But anyway, Because of the fact they did not keep their nose to the grindstone, the South, aka Confederacy, was able to advance this lie. And now they have educated over 3 or 4+ generations of Americans in this lie. The poisonous lost cause lessons were taught to multiple generations of Southerners to uphold institutionalized white supremacy, in part through public school curriculums shaped by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. More famous these days for their controversial Confederate monuments, the UDC had an almost singular focus on making sure the lost cause propaganda was so ingrained in the minds of Southern youth that it would be perpetual. Their most effective tool, school textbooks. And now I know you guys have heard me say this over and over again. The textbook was the way the Daughters of the Confederacy were able to seize control of the minds of Southern students, black and white. Now, I mentioned in the previous video how insane it was to me to watch somebody black make a statement inside of the chat, black people were better off under segregation. And that was a comment made by, I think it was Byron Daniels, black conservative, and I believe he's a Florida representative. Robert, what's going on, man? Salute. Hey, thanks for joining, man. I thought I was going to be here by myself, but you know me, I'll go ahead and get it out nonetheless. You guys can catch it later. So, as I was saying, folks, this whole aspect of where we are right now is because of the fact that we have allowed the distorted version of history to be played out by the South. And I've said this too many times. I'm going to keep saying it so people understand it. The Confederacy is back. In a sense, they never left, but they've upgraded their motto or their task points, whatever you want to call it, through the use of Project 2025. That manifesto is just an extension of what the Daughters of the Confederacy started back in 1894, and in 1909 were making progress to make sure that textbooks would garner the information of the lost cause throughout the southern region and some areas up north as well. So let's go ahead and keep moving here. Where is, you know what, before we do that, let's do this part. Let me read you some more information regarding how they have used their ways into pretty much just destroying the aspect of truth, which is why you have people on different sides of the fence literally fighting, saying that you're lying, you're lying. The Constitution of the Daughters of the Confederacy's North Carolina Division, for example, let me read from here, said the group aimed to ensure that the portion of American history relating to the Civil War shall be properly taught in the public schools of the state, and to use its influence towards this object in all private schools. Properly taught. Hey, Rob, let me make sure that I get your words up in here, man. All right, yo, Robert Platinum says, thanks for educating the people on the Daughters of the Confederacy. Not too many people know about that organization. No, they don't, man. And I've tried for a few years to say something, but because of the fact we're watching the attack on Black culture happen again right now, I felt it's necessary to go ahead and put this back out here. But you know as well as I do that there are some of us who are not going to heed this lesson if they came up in areas that constantly reinforce the lost cause narrative. Robert Platinum again says, I used to walk past a Confederate statue that was erected and owned by the Daughters of the Confederacy. And the statue was in North Carolina. Yep. Remember now, the solid states consisted of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. I'm probably missing a few in there, but you get what I'm saying here. Those areas primarily were the ones that were infested with the Daughters of the Confederacy putting out this nonsense of a benevolent South and a heroic South. Where were we? Yeah, that bare bones that bare bones concept was given flesh by Division President Mrs. I.W. Faison at the group's annual convention in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1909. Now, let me just break for a second. Rob, do you remember what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina? Remember, I want to say it was it must have been around 1894, 1896, but it was before 1900. Remember the story of Wilmington, North Carolina? Boom. There we go. Yes. Now, what Rob and I are talking about right now is something that you do not see in any of the history books. Now, if you're paying attention right now, folks, you can see that history has been subverted. So anything that I happen to mention that you've never heard of, it doesn't mean I'm lying. It just means that because of the fact I have been to, in my instance, went to higher education where I learned some of this, and through some of the people that I met through higher education, they have told me things that are not listed in any of the books that you can actually find out here on the internet, because people were able to still put the information out there, although greater society was not privy to this because of the Daughters of the Confederacy having a lockdown on publishers. All right, here we go. The overthrow of a democratically elected government. Yep, and this government in William, North Carolina was composed of blacks and whites. Now, remember when I said that in Reconstruction, even though it ended in 1877, the antebellum South came back? That does not mean that because of those 11 years, there weren't pockets in the South that were still experiencing economic success, as well as educational, medical, you name it. There were places that were booming and blacks living together and working in cohesion. That is, until finally the Ku Klux Klan, along with white nationalists or anyone else who had it out for abolitionists and people working with blacks, managed to come in and overthrow Wilmington, North Carolina. Yep, it was printed in the newspaper at the time. Yep, I read the same articles also, Rob. Oh, excuse me. Several years ago, after the massacre and overthrow, the newspaper printed that Charles Aycock was a friend of the Negro. Yeah, again, the distortion that went on back then was ridiculous. But thanks for adding in, Rob. If you know anything else, by all means, please throw it in here. So going forward again, said Miss Faison, we must see that the correct history, again, this is her calling the lost cause narrative, the lie that has been perpetuated then and is strong as ever now. How do we know this? Project 2025 and Donald Trump. We must see that the correct history is taught to our children and train them, not in hatred towards the North, who differed from us, but in knowledge of true history of the South in the war between the states and the causes that led up to the war, so that they will be able to state facts. I can barely read this nonsense. But to state facts and prove that they are right in the principles for which their fathers fought and died, and continue to know that our cause was just and right. There is an expression often used by our people as the lost cause. Let us forget such, for it is not the truth. No, our cause was not lost because it was not wrong. This is what the president means by removing anything that is anti-American. Yes. Donald Trump is talking about anything that does not subscribe or is not prescribed to what we hear right now, what I'm reading to you from the Daughters of the Confederacy with this bullshit about the correct history. This is not the correct history. Anyone who studied history that does not have this lie of the South being heroic, being benevolent, that is the correct history. What we're reading here is this false history that has been perpetuated and that is still being perpetuated. A few years earlier, National UDC President Mrs. James A. Roundsville put it this way at the group's annual convention in Charleston, South Carolina. It has ever been the cherished purpose of the Daughters of the Confederacy to secure greater educational opportunities for Confederate children, and by thorough training of their powers of mind, heart, and hand, render it possible for these representatives of our Southern race, they're talking about the children, to retain for that race its supremacy in its own land. But recall what Donald Trump was saying, that African Americans were trying to depict America as being racist. Yep, here we go. And let me go ahead back to the first statement, folks, for anyone who's watching this on replay. Whenever you see me mention in the chat that some black conservatives are cheering on their own destruction, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I think I made a comment on the panel with Fatty the other day where I said that blacks cheering on, as Rob is saying, their own destruction, they're literally carrying water here. This goes back to the comment I made about Fresh and Fit, where Fresh was sitting here making jokes, talking about black people with a couple of white supremacists. And somewhere in the conversation, something was said by Fresh, and one of the white supremacists said, hey, yo, man, appreciate the help and everything that you're doing, but you're going to have to leave just like everybody else. Fresh was like, yo, what do you mean I got to leave? I said, yo, man, you're not white. So you've got to get out just like everybody else. And of course, the conversation then divulged down into nigger and a whole bunch of other stuff, or saying nigger, all that negativity that you generally get when you're around the company of a white supremacist. So Myron was thinking that he was cool with everybody. He's back here just jaw jacking. And then all of a sudden, he gets a subtle reminder. You ain't like us. All right, moving on. So the Rutherford Committee. Now, if you're not familiar with that, I stated here by mentioning that there were three folks up the top here who were going to put faces to a lot of stuff here. So first we have Mildred Lewis Rutherford, who was the historian, and she was the officer in the Daughters of the Confederacy for about 5 or 6 years or so. But that information is, again, able to be pulled from this site and other bits of information that I'll leave either here that you can pick up, or if not, you can find it in the description. I'll also be modifying the description. So if you see some things added that are not there that I mentioned right now, that's because I realized, oops, forgot to mention it. But always look for the description. And I'll make sure that I get a little bit better on the community page about updating anything that might be missing from the videos. Next, you have Irvin Walker, who was a general in the Confederacy. And also you have Julian Carr. Now, notice how respectful that it speaks of all these individuals here. Whereas if you don't realize it, if you look at this, you're looking at the face of pure evil. When I say pure evil, I'm talking about pure evil proponents of slavery, of racism, of disenfranchisement, of segregation. That's what these folks stand for, or should I say stood for. All right, so as I mentioned before, there was a reunion that happened in 1919, and you've got a whole congregation of these folks. You've got the United Confederate Veterans. You've got children of the Confederacy. You've got sons of Confederate veterans. You've got multiple groups that are put together who are pushing and cherishing this lie of the lost cause. They're even having essays that are being written. They're going to the point of where, as we'll get to this here shortly, where they are going to publishers who are sympathizers of the lost cause narrative and asking these people to make sure that any and everything that has to do to glorify the South are put in textbooks and distributed across America. So let me get a little bit of background information about a few of the folks here. So we've talked about basically who the folks are on the committee. Let's do this. At its annual reunion in Atlanta in 1919, United Confederate veterans set up a committee to promulgate, which is to push out, the lost cause version of history through textbooks. Now, this is what I was just talking about. This is the paragraph I was looking for, and it was right under my nose. It brought together the most prominent Confederate heritage associations. Again, there's that word, heritage. UCV, which was what, the United Confederate Veterans, the Daughters of the Confederacy, or UDC, and Sons of Confederate Veterans. Each appointed 5 members. It came to be known as the Rutherford Committee after its most prominent member, Mildred Lewis Rutherford. Oops. Hey, let me jump over here, Rob. Where's my mouse? A lot of Black conservatives say things like, none of you experienced racism. That happened a long time ago. None of that affects any of you. Yeah, you're right. It's all nonsense. And what I hate the most is when people say none of that affects you, or wait a minute. So check this out. Let me take a side street for a moment. I'm hearing this nonsense from both white conservatives and Black conservatives. You were never a slave. That doesn't affect you. Okay, so riddle me this, Batman. I may not have been a slave, but I bear the resemblance, the skin tone of a slave. And because of this resemblance that I bear, someone who was not ever, or in somebody's race that was never subjected to slavery, always seems to want to call me nigger or start a fight with me about being Black or some other type of racist nonsense. So how is it that someone wants to sit here and say, well, what do you know about racism? It doesn't affect you. When in actuality, you could be sitting in, I want to say it was Bradford or Bradley, Tennessee. It may have been Nashville, Tennessee, about 4 or 5 years ago, where a Black man and his white girlfriend were sitting outside having dinner, and they got rolled up on by some skinheads. Of course, both of them are out there fighting. So luckily enough, the fight was broken up and the skinheads disappeared. But again, he was sitting out there minding his business. But yet, because of the fact that he bears a resemblance to a slave, people who have racial propensity showed up and started a fight with him. But yet, we hear Black conservatives and white conservatives saying, oh, you were never a slave. Why are you worried about that? Racism doesn't exist. All right, especially considering that eugenics board in North Carolina wasn't disbanded until 1977. The same year that my sister was born, the same board that sterilized Black women. There's all types of heinous information that you will not find in the books that we see out here because of the fact, as I said before, there was interference that was run. You're damn near looking at subverted ideology that anyone who subscribes to the Lost Translation is following. These folks literally do not know any better. You can't tell them anything because this is what they were raised on. So going forward again, another prominent member of the committee was Julian S. Carr, the former Confederate general and North Carolina industrialist. He's now infamous for his 1913 speech at the dedication of the Daughters of Confederacy's Silent Sam Confederate Veterans Monument, formerly on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, in which he urged support for white supremacy and called it a pleasing duty to horsewhip a Negro wench for allegedly publicly insulting a Southern lady. There's other articles that talks about how he supposedly whipped her so bad that her clothes were in tatters. All right, we've got the Greensboro Massacre of 1979, which was nationally televised. Now, I missed that one, but again, I was 9 years old. Where was I? I think I was in Minot, North Dakota with my parents. So I was in the Great White North. I was 30 miles from the Canadian border, so I may have missed that one. All right, so the other person on the board that we're talking about specifically here, I think it's Irvin Walker. Now, the man who served as the committee's chair for a number of years was C. Irvin Walker of South Carolina, also a former Confederate general. Notice how these Confederate heritage associations, again, cater directly to anything Confederate. So it would not be a surprise for any one of the generals who were surviving at some point in time to be a part of those festivities. Pardon me for a second, folks. My camera has dipped out on me. All right, there we go. Now get this. Now I'm sure you guys have heard of the Citadel, right? So this was the premier place where training was for folks going into the military. It was a military school. He was known for spearheading the reopening of the Citadel, the South's premier military academy, which was closed after the Civil War. Now I want you to listen to this comment right here. During the days of Negro domination, now these are his words, not mine. During the days of Negro domination in South Carolina, I knew it would be hopeless to attempt the resuscitation, he wrote in the memorandum of General C. Irvin Walker of his work concerning the reopening of the Citadel, now housed in the school's archives. But when the state was returned, meaning that when the Union Army was pulled out and antebellum South sentiments were able to come back, but when the state was returned to the control of its own citizens, the white people of South Carolina, I felt that the time had come to move, and I started that movement, which ended in success. All right, the SAT was a test created to exclude blacks from colleges. All right, all of us have experienced racism in some form. Very true. Most of us experienced it in a more covert form. And then for the covert form, that's what I'm seeing nowadays, Rob. I will have to say that nowadays it's more, or it was more covert up until 2017, 2018 in Trump's first administration. Racial crimes, hate crimes, more specifically, spiked. You had people who were let me stop saying people. You had people of color who were literally being killed in 2017. You had a young Indian man who was run over on an Indian reservation by someone in a truck. You had a white man, a young white man who said, "I just want to kill niggers." And he did kill him one in the middle of the street. I believe it was a young second lieutenant from West Point, someone that he killed. I don't know if anybody else remembers that. Then you had some girls, a black girl, and I think it was a Muslim girl who were on the train being harassed by a white guy with a knife. Two gentlemen tried to intervene, and I think the white guy with the knife managed to kill both of them. But again, these are all news articles that you can go back to if you look at 2017. So yes, there was a spike in racial crimes when Donald Trump entered the White House in his first presidency. I've even had white teachers that taught during segregation, and I was born in 1980. Now, folks seem to forget that in 1980, that was where the final stage of the ideology flip between the two parties, Republican and Democrats, was finalized. Matter of fact, I've got some information concerning that time period that Lee Atwater was talking specifically in 1981 about the coded words we were talking about how speech was becoming abstract to hide the original intent of what was being said. Yes, a lot of those committed those crimes yelled Trump's name while committing those crimes. All right, fact. But again, I can't have that conversation with folks in a larger forum who have been educated and who have listened to the lost cause narrative their entire lives. So if anyone is wondering why Trump is saying that we're trying to rewrite history, no, we are not rewriting history. He is following rewritten history that he believes that is the truth, because that is all that he knows of. So anything outside of that, the African American Museum, whether it be Smithsonian, Boston, anything to do with DEI, affirmative action, Operation Push, the Rainbow Coalition. Now, I may be naming some things that some of you may have never heard before, but this was all fact that was pushed in the mid to late 70s going to the 80s. So let me take a side street for a second here. Generation Y was supposed to be the next bastion of support, the defenders of the privileges that have been earned since 1965. As I said before, starting in 1965, that was construed or is construed to be the second Reconstruction period that we are in the middle of right now, that we are on the verge of potentially losing. So I'm not saying that all of Generation Y has failed us, but I'm saying that a majority of them who do not know what we're discussing right now feel that this has got nothing to do with them because they're so separated from it. Now, I just want to make this known to everybody. I was born 5 years after Jim Crow had been abolished. This is 1970 when I was born. So in 1965, after the Voting Rights Act was I guess what it came to be, where it was passed, Jim Crow was pretty much obliterated. Now, that didn't mean the attitudes that people who supported Jim Crow had gone away overnight. It just meant that officially it was no longer acceptable to chase black folks down, beat them, hit them in the faces with bats, crunches, whatever they had available, spray water on us, sick dogs on us. No, that was gone. I was born 6 years after the Civil Rights Act was passed. Now, when you hear Trump talk about, oh, we want to go back to a merit-based system, well, there was no merit-based system to begin with. That is why affirmative action was put into place. That's why the Department of Justice created the Civil Rights Division to look at instances where civil rights were violated, or at least starting in was it 1957 where the executive order, or was it the Civil Rights Act of 1957? I'll have to go back and check that. But nonetheless, the Department of Justice had a department which has recently been shut down, obviously, by Donald Trump, because of the fact that it was considered to be divisive, because, again, it was the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. A lot of the stuff that people feel removed from, it was fresh for some of us born in the early 70s, and even those folks like Robert born after the 80s. The thing here, if you were born in 1980 and going forward, 1980 was the last year of Generation X. The 1965 to 1980. Then you had Generation Y, which went from 1981 to 1996, we'll say 97. So in that time frame, these young cats are turning 35. Well, actually, I'm sorry, turning 30. We're looking at the last members of Generation Y. Then, of course, you got folks like Robert, born in 1980. He is the last of Generation X. But there's some overlap with Generation X and Generation Y. But nonetheless, when you're born a certain period where you start missing what's being said or what was experienced, that's where the problems start to begin, because you start developing that disconnection. When they finally are successful in erasing our experiential history, the blacks that follow are subject to oppression in its more traditional form. Yeah, we're talking about going back to antebellum South atmosphere. Oh, he's a good nigga. I warned my black ex-coworkers about what was coming about 5 years ago. They didn't take it seriously, and here we are. Yep. This is that mess right now. If you try and have this conversation with CJ, Fantastic, or a few of the other folks, when I get on Hamp's panel, or even when some of these folks come over to Fatty's channel, you can't have this conversation because they feel like, oh man, you guys are being all hyperbolic. Y'all so stupid, man. Black folks just act like victims. Now, you're hearing me say that, Robert, when you say that CJ appears to be one of these folks who adheres to the lost cause translation, or is it just ignorance? Are you serious? A white supremacist? Briefly fell out behind that. Oh, well, so I guess when you guys are cool now, is he still hanging out with this dude? That's the question that I should ask. Damn. I don't see the problem. Okay, your boy is a white supremacist. Man, for whatever reason, I don't know how CJ is cool with that, but anybody else who has experienced racism, who has truly experienced racism, even if it's like, yo, what's up, nigga? Pardon my language, but if that's how they talk to each other. Now, I don't use the word, but I'm only using this to give examples right now. I don't run around and every other second or third word out of my mouth is nigga this, nigga that. Anyone who knows me knows that is not how I speak. If I use the word, it's because I'm giving an example of how it was used in some type of situation that I happen to observe, which I called foolery to begin with. Whew. Well, anyway, going on. Here we go. So we're talking about Irvin. All right. So again, General Irvin was also the leader in the Carolina Rifle Club, a group that offered itself as an alternative to the Ku Klux Klan, which Irvin had joined but personally found too cumbersome and liable to be abused, whatever that is. As he wrote in his 1869 book titled after the club itself, the purpose of the Rifle Club, he said, was to combat the greatest social crime of all the ages, the sudden emancipation of 4 million of African slaves wholly incapable of freedom. According to Irvine, that the South was partially saved from the terrible results which were to be expected from this sudden emancipation of 4 millions of Negro slaves, her people are and ever will be indebted first to the civilizing and humanizing influences of the institution of Negro slavery, as it had existed in the Southern states from the days of the colonies down to 1865. Second, to the innate superiority and naturally dominating power of the white race. Third, in the absence of the quality of savage ferocity in the Negro race in the South, induced by generations of humane training by his white masters and mistresses, and to the kindness and loyalty felt and manifested by the former slave to his white friends in the South. CJ, slave to his white friends in the South, and mainly to the courage and endurance of Southern white women and the manliness and patience of Southern white men. Wow. What's that, Rob? Just a second. The white supremacists sabotaged the newly freed blacks and used the results of their sabotage as justification for oppression. Yes. It's any and everything that you can think of about that. Anything that could be misused and misinterpreted that pushed the narrative was something that the Daughters of the Confederacy did, and plus anyone who was associated with that movement, which were, as I said, white supremacists, would use whatever angle they could to distort any facts or truth and use that to undermine whatever progress that was being made or had been made for blacks in America. So we had talked about the textbooks that were used. Now, if we talk about again, I wanted, was it Mildred? What is her name again? I keep getting her name wrong. I want to say Rutherford. Yes, Mildred Lewis Rutherford. Now, as I said before, she was responsible for putting textbooks together that were considered to be the guide of how to approach making sure that the lost translation was properly taught in schools. So this is her first book, a measuring rod to test textbooks and reference books in schools, colleges, and libraries. All right, so this was the first book that put together the techniques and what was needed to be taught to ensure that the lost cause translation was effectively taught and more or less prepared the future generations to have them just solely ingrain this and accept this as the real truth. Stay tuned. There's more to go on with this. Ah, yes. Even black women use that against black men when they say things like, "What have y'all ever built?" Well, believe it or not, we built the country. Who do you think the manual labor was? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what we can say what we built. Incredible. In this, we have the modern situation of black men, black women perpetuating white supremacy. Now, one thing I will say, Rob, now, when we look at that, when we talk about the supremacy being perpetuated, now keep in mind, when people talk about, for example, the housing situation, I think the next video that I'm going to do is going to look at the 1960s when we looked at the, I think it was the Federal Housing Administration and how they went about getting the projects together. The projects originally were for people who could actually pay. They weren't made for poor people. But still, looking at that, if we look at it from the perspective of, let's say, I don't want to say this, the Democrats, which were the segregationists, who were the descendants of the Confederacy, of the racists, of the slave owners, up until 1965, remember how everyone likes to talk about, oh, the black man was pushed out of the house. It was the Democratic Party. Who was still running the Democratic Party before 1965, before the party swapped to whereas all the racists and Southern Democrats in the Democratic Party went to the Republican Party, and those Republicans who did not want to stay with the change of the Republican Party, who was turning more and more racist towards black Americans, they went to the Democratic Party. Who was in charge of the Democratic Party up until 1965? Or who were the majority of its members? The racists, the segregationists, the slave owners, or the descendants of the segregationists and the slave owners. They were the ones creating those policies that were pushing the black man out of the home, or at least making it difficult for blacks to own homes, to own property. It was the Democratic Party of racists up until 1965. So whenever anyone hears this nonsense about, oh, the Democrats did this to the black folks, they were running the black men out of the home, it was not the Democratic Party of today. It was the racists from, or the descendants at that time of segregationists and slave owners who now are in the Republican Party. Yep, at one point, Biden did, but I think one thing I'll say, Rob, is that racist ideology, where he talked about the jungles and everything like that, that was another one of his misspeaks, where he did not think about how he wanted to phrase that, and it came out wrong. But yes, he had to take the time to step back, and he had to apologize for his perspective and some of the things that he said. But people who have a tendency to realize that they've done wrong, they make the change. If they mean it, they will show it. And Biden did show that from the points on where he came clean and came clear and made it known where his allegiance lied. But when you think about Robert Byrd, also think about Strom Thurmond. I forgot who else was a part of that group who left in 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. These guys maintained a level of support almost until maybe the last year or maybe 5 or 10 years of their lives. Ew. There you go. Thank you, Rob. The modern Republicans try to take credit for the old Republicans while assigning the actions of the old Democrats to new Democrats. Just as I explained it, that is a more concise way that you put it. Yes, they try and play these games. That's one of the reasons why I did a video pointing out how I think Dennis Sperling was trying to say that, oh, the Democratic Party, oh, look at what they did back in the 60s. Look at what they did to slaves. That's the Democratic Party right now. No, it is not. But for those who subscribe again to the lost narrative, or excuse me, lost cause narrative, they believe anything that Dennis Sperling says. All right, moving on here. Here's the second book that Mildred Rutherford had written in regards to the lost cause narrative on what needs to be taught in schools. But the difference with this book, though, yo, Rob, check out the name of this. Truths of History. Now, the difference with this book that Mildred wrote, the difference in this one is now he was more or less going after books that did not adhere to the format of what they wanted taught or what she wanted taught when it came to the lost cause narration. These are now books that she was saying that needed to be banned because they did not adhere to the standard. But take a look at this. Truths of History. A fair, unbiased, impartial, unprejudiced, and conscientious study of history. Object: to secure a peaceful settlement of the many perplexing questions now causing contention between the North and the South. Damn it, girl, it was your nonsense and your falsehoods that caused that contention. Are you serious? Are you serious? It is your work that has undermined the Southern mentality to not accept the reality that the South lost. But you're talking from a perspective that, oh, this is an unbiased, unprejudiced approach. You are the prejudice and the bias. Yo, yeah, straight crazy. But again, this is what Trump and the Republicans subscribe to. So this is one of those things that I felt was missing from the conversation. I mean, for years, I've been trying to figure out how is it that people are sitting here and believing this nonsense, this misinformation, this disinformation. Oh, shit. And this only came to be after the past election, the 2024 election, where I finally got a little bit more focused and thought about it. And then it went back to the thought of the daughters from the Confederacy, the influence that they had. That's how it was done. Yep. And the problem is, if we have the broken black family, the question is, what are they subscribing to? Where are they getting the information from? Now, think about this. When you hear blacks talk about the nuclear family, remember now, Rob, if we were looking at it from the 1920s, when the aspect of the nuclear family first was introduced, who subscribes to that concept of the nuclear families? And that is generally white culture. That's not saying good or bad, but we're just saying that that's part of the culture. Now, remember where we've also had discussions about certain cultures have actions that are not condoned in others. For example, in some European cultures, you have girls as young as 13 marry men who are almost 2 decades or so older than they are. You have some cultures who eat certain foods that certain cultures not eat. For example, they eat dog in Korea, but we don't do that in America. All right, we have certain cultures that just do things that is normal over there. Like I believe in, I want to say India, where they don't eat cows because cows are considered sacred. But over here, we wear it out on the 4th of July when it comes to a baconator or something like that, right? Yeah, so we definitely have practices that are frowned upon depending upon where you are in the world. But again, going back to this nonsense right here, a fair, unbiased, impartial, unprejudiced, and conscientious study of history, there's the bias right there that Trump and everyone in the Republican Party adhere to. So I want everyone who's looking at this in replay, who see that Rob out here vibing out on this, I want you to keep in mind now, you should not have any type of wonderment. All right, there should not be any type of confusion as to where Trump is getting this from. I am laying it all out in front of you if you have never seen it. This is where his whole premise comes from. He thinks that the history that is actually accepted is the fake history. He truly believes this. And again, it's because of Mildred Lewis Rutherford and a slew of folks who follow her from the Daughters of the Confederacy that have been corrupted with this false lie of history. Now, here's something that I want to include in here. We talked about the Confederate General Julian Carr. He had a building named after him at, I want to say, the University of Duke, or excuse me, Duke University. He's got a building. I think we talked about Walker. Yeah, Walker is known for reopening the Citadel after the Negro domination. Now, notice it was okay to use the phrase Negro domination during the course of the Reconstruction period. Once it was open, as he said, it went back to its citizens, the white folks or the white people of South Carolina. Notice no one says anything about Caucasian or white domination, right? But again, this is how peaked that racial segregation, that the racial issues and the issues of segregation cut deep into America. But to hear Donald Trump say it, oh, they're trying to say that America is racist. Does it need to be said? Let me know if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Drop a 1 in the chat if, again, you are picking up what I'm putting down. If you're seeing here that I tell no lies right about now, depending upon which ideology you subscribe to, obviously. So I think we have covered, we covered this bit. This is just another aspect. Yeah, so it's the same thing. All right, so one of the other things I wanted to put in here, because we need to wind this down, we have the faithful slave myth. All right, so what is that? I'll give an example of this here in a moment. There's a story that I want to give you guys some background on. The faithful slave myth is a fabricated narrative primarily associated with the lost cause movement that portrays enslaved people as loyal, contented, and unconcerned with their own freedom. It's a historical distortion used to justify and perpetuate the institution of slavery, particularly in the South. This myth has been used to create monuments and memorials that present a false and romanticized view of slavery. There are a lot of small organizations that taught these things undercover. They were free to teach these things because those groups were only accessible by whites, normally upper and middle class. Yes, if you were not of a certain financial stature, even if you were white, you were not invited to certain get-togethers, group functions, things at the Elk Lodge. For example, the association that hosted the ball that Justice Barrett attended growing up. Oh, exactly. Let's not forget about is it Cindy Hyde Park Smith, who attended an all-white school in Mississippi. Yeah, they still have academies in some of these places. And I think her daughter is attending it right now, or had attended a few years ago. But again, it's all right to have those, but when we look at public education that is out here right now, they're doing their best to destroy it, or they're in the process of destroying it. No lies being told. Let's expand this for a little bit. All right, so everybody, if you take a look up here, you can see the search information that I put in here to pull up this information. If you yourselves want to go back and take a look at this, and again, if you don't see it inside of the description, I'll go back and put it later. Or if you can just pick it up from right here, we're still good, just as long as you know how to research this information. All right, so moving along. All right, so the information that I have here, I picked up from the Thurgood Marshall Institute. I think the last time this page was updated, was 2023. So I think this is one of the pages that I called that had a discussion about, again, the lost cause and how it has done damage to our nation. Let me jump to the part that really matters. Here we go. At the end of the Civil War, history books were used to reshape the country's collective memory in ways that reframes the South's secession from the Union as American heroes and recast the horrors of slavery as a positive institution for individuals who were enslaved, allowing those with the most power to decide how the past is remembered can have dangerous implications for both politics and policy. For example, at the end of the U.S. Civil War and the beginning of Reconstruction, white supremacists used textbooks. Here we go again. Used textbooks as a vessel for neo-Confederate collective memory. During this period, neo-Confederates, a reactionary and revisionist branch of American white nationalism, campaigned for a narrative called the Lost Cause, a myth, which was a psychological response to trauma of defeat. The Lost Cause attempted to preserve the honor of the South by casting the Confederate defeat in the best possible light. Two of the main components of the myth of the Lost Cause are that one, the South's secession from the Union had little or nothing to do with the institution of slavery, and two, enslaved people benefited from slavery due to benevolent slave owners. Now, you guys heard me say this at the very beginning, right? Or again, I'm addressing the people now if you're watching this in the replay. But if you go back to the beginning, I made statements about how the South was perceived to be benevolent towards their enslaved people, aka the slaves. The gross miseducation that the Lost Cause spreads is similar to today's anti-truth movement, as they both seek to take one group's collective memory and extend it to the entire nation in an effort to maintain racial hierarchies. So if you want to read any more on this, again, this is at the Thurgood Marshall Institute. And I do believe I have this in the description. If not, you can pick it up from right here. Oops, what was that, Rod? Just want to make sure I don't miss your statements here. Here we go, the last one. The benevolence argument was brought up by CJ's friend on the panel. Oh, what episode or what panel was this? Obviously, I must have missed that. Are we talking about what's the Dusty White guy? Or are we talking about Jake? If you're saying CJ's friend on the panel, I'm thinking that you may be talking about Jake, right? But nonetheless, yeah, this stuff is ridiculous of what's being said here. Yep, I thought so. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, man. Jake, I'll put it this way. Like I've said before, Jake is entertaining, but he is infactual as hell. And as I said to him on the panel, at least one of the shows, I think it was the one where I was one of the proctors. I said basically that what happens, or what was supposed to happen, is that I was not there for judging the entertainment. I was there to judge the facts. And I made it clear right up front. If you are not going to be a part of speaking of the facts, we're going to have a problem. And Jake's biggest issue is that he wants to speak not to the fact, but he'll argue the perspective. And then, of course, he'll come up with a narrative that he'll prop up with his opinion. And when all that is done, he'll say, and those are the facts. As if he said anything that relates to anything that was there. So again, he's fun to watch if you don't mind the constant distractions. But it gets down to a point to where we've got to have a level of truth. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It was Jake. I thought that's who you're hinting at. But yeah, it is hard to have a conversation. Again, he's good for entertainment if that's what you want, but you can't have him in a factual conversation. All right, so here's something that I found also from the Smithsonian Magazine, and this was one of the former mayors. Here we go, Mitch Landrieu, and he was giving everyone his thoughts about what he had to say when he learned about the Lost Cause. So I'm not sure how old he got to be before he knew this, but it sounded like back in 2018, this was something that he'd happened to come upon in recent years. Now, there's a statement. Let me just get down to where he was making his statements. There's a narrative. Here we go. I had some limited knowledge of the Lost Cause, but the word cult hit my ear in a different way. The narrative for the National Register of Historic Places application read, the cult of the Lost Cause had its roots in the Southern search for justification and the need to find a substitute for victory in the Civil War. In attempting to deal with defeat, Southerners created an image of the war as a great heroic epic. Now, when they talk about a great heroic epic, think of Homer and the Illiad and the Odyssey. Shit, I'm surprised I remember that. Talk about going back to high school. But anyway, think of that as being heroic epics. A major theme of the cult of the lost cause was the clash of two civilizations, one inferior to the other. The North, invigorated by constant struggle with nature, had become materialistic, grasping for wealth and power. The South had a more generous climate, which had led to a finer society based upon veracity and honor in man, chastity and fidelity in women. Like tragic heroes, Southerners had waged a noble but doomed struggle to preserve their superior civilization. There was an element of chivalry in the way the South had fought, achieving noteworthy victories against staggering odds. This was the lost cause as the late 19th century saw it, and a whole generation of Southerners set about glorifying and celebrating it. Again, how ridiculous can this be? I mean, we can't laugh it out anymore. I keep telling folks, no matter how they look at it and think, oh, man, you're just being hyperbolic. No, I am not being hyperbolic. When you look at how Harriet Tubman's information was erased from the national parks, I think it was put back, but I think they pulled it again. I'll have to go back and take a look. Jackie Robinson, his information was taken away or taken off the sites. Then they put it back, but I think they pulled that again as well. When you look at how General C.Q. Brown, for example, the Air Force, Trump talked highly of him initially when he put him in place about 2 years ago. But then he removes him. We've lost confidence. Doesn't give a reason why. And then promotes someone, the new general, I forget what the guy's name, again, a white general, that they brought out of retirement, promoted to a 4-star just to take General Brown's place, who had earned this through appointment, through his 30 plus years in the military, through education. Now, when I hear people say DEI, originally we think of the original meaning, diversity, education, and inclusion. But then you get the misappropriated and the distorted version of DEI, which is didn't earn it. But when you look at everyone who is a part of this current cabinet right now, they lost elections. All 22 of these folks who are sitting inside of Trump's cabinet right now, they were not chosen by the folks in the elections that they ran, but yet they want to say that others did not earn it. So when I hear DEI, the statement that I put back here, matter of fact, let me put this in print here. I'm going to go ahead and let me share this chat with you, Rob. Get out of here. We'll call this Trump's DEI equals definitely extortion and this is what I think of when I hear anyone say DEI as of this moment. Trump's DEI, and that equals definitely extortion and intimidation. Oh, yes. Matter of fact, I just realized my banner hasn't been running this entire time. Let's go ahead and put this ticker out here. Yes, sir. This is what today's show is dedicated to: politics, but also a fact check of the Daughters of the Confederacy's subversion of history. Yeah, exactly. When are veterans not qualified? That is some of the most asinine reasoning I've ever heard of. The whole point of these programs put together were for veterans. Therefore, veterans are a part of it. But now veterans are not qualified for their own programs that were created for them, and in some cases by them. You know, there's not much to say about that, right? Not much to say about that. But before I forget here, now remember I said something about, what was that, the false slave narrative? Is that what we were talking about? no, the faithful slave narrative. Now, the faithful slave narrative, I almost forgot about that. Let's look back and we talk about let's talk about Nat Turner Rebellion. I think there were 55 whites who were killed in that. Then you also had the Denmark Vesey Rebellion. All right, so as a result of these rebellions, you started having more armed forces in the South looking to more or less end the lives or take down anyone who was rumored to be part of some type of rebellion that was being put in place. John Brown, the abolitionist, led an attack on Harper's Ferry at one of the armories. Now, again, he was a known abolitionist, and he took 21 men with him one day on a raid to take over an armory. And during the course of doing that, they killed a freed black man by the name of Hayward Shepherd. Now, this is where we're going to have a conversation real fast about the faithful slave myth. Now, the question would be asked by folks, was Hayward Shepherd one of the folks inside of John Brown's raid? No, he was not. Matter of fact, let's do this. Let me go ahead and move this over here. Because to see how it's explained in some areas, you'd probably miss it. Let me see if we can do this. Hayward. There we go. All right. So as I said, Hayward Shepherd was not with part of John Brown's raid. He was actually a free black man, a railroad employee, and a resident of nearby Winchester, Virginia, who was tragically killed by John Brown's raiders during the raid. He was not part of the group of men who participated in the raid. Now, here's the crazy thing. He was a free black man. John Brown and his folks were on a fight to help free the blacks. As a matter of fact, what John Brown was hoping is that by his attack on the armory would help inspire other slaves to rise up and assist. None of them came. No free slaves showed up to help him with his attack on the armory, because even the slaves who wanted to be free, they had seen what had happened to folks who were turned in for the Prosser Rebellion. Now, if you remember, the Gabriel Prosser Rebellion never made it off the ground because one of those good slave folks went and told Massa, hey, they's trying to have a rebellion. And consequently, I believe everybody was killed, probably by hanging, but I have to go back and verify that. But that one never got off the ground because somebody told before it kicked off. But now in the issue here with Hayward Shepherd, what ended up happening is that you had the Southerners in that area who tried to use Hayward's death in a means of saying, oh, he was one of the good ones. He was one of the good slaves that loved Master, that we loved because of the fact that he was a hard worker. He loved everything about his life, and Master was the best thing that ever happened to him. There was a monument that they wanted to put up at Harper's Ferry, presenting Hayward in this fashion, as if he were a slave, to which he was not. He was a freed man. But recall how we're talking about, it doesn't matter when it comes to the lost cause translation. There's always got to be some distortion that has the slave showing some type of benevolence or some type of undying love to his slave master. So what I want to do right now, I think we've hit all the important points. So let's go ahead and pause the background music and let's get in some modern day chatter here. So not that I haven't been real with anyone, but let me go ahead and get a little bit realer right now. Oh shit, I didn't know we're past 2 o'clock. All right, check this. As you heard me say in the very beginning, the Confederacy is back. Now, we don't see them running around wearing the uniforms, anything like that, but the Confederate mindset, all of the tasks, or we'll say the manifesto, the old manifesto of the Confederate South, all of that has been upgraded and put into Project 2024. About 7 to 8 months ago, there was a warning that was put out of Project 2024. And you couldn't get people to acknowledge that. You couldn't get anyone to believe that. And of course, Donald Trump has stated, oh, no, there's no truth in that. Project 2024, I'm not familiar what that is. You know, any little things you could think of that he went through, all the machinations to act as if he had no knowledge of what it was. Now, Robert Vaught, who is now one of many folks who are in the who are responsible for writing Project 2025, people who Trump denied knowing, are now in his administration. So what I want to do here is to go back, and I want to show you guys the video that came out, it's about 7 months ago. So it's about a quick 5, maybe 6 minutes, but I'll try and do my best not to interrupt too much of this so we can go ahead and get through this, all right? Fair use, fair use. Whoops. Okay, got it. Okay, again, fair use, fair use.
Captured on hidden camera of one of the architects of Project 2025.
And we have buffering, just a moment.
He is also the policy director of the RNC team that rewrote the party's official platform. In the secret video obtained by CNN, the RNC operative talks about his controversial conservative blueprint for a second Trump term, and that Trump's disavowal of Project 2025 is just politics. Hyung La out front for us tonight.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
You are looking at secretly recorded video of Russell Vought, a former cabinet member in the Trump administration.
This year has been predominantly now getting ready for a year 5 of a Trump administration. We've got about 350 different documents that are regulations and things of that nature.
Vought, the platform policy director for the Republican National Committee, says he is building the plan for Trump's second term.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25.
Trump publicly disavowed Project 2025, a conservative blueprint for his administration if he gets reelected. But in private, Vought said that's just politics. The details of the real plans are secret and based on Trump's own beliefs.
Notwithstanding, I expected to hear 10 more times from the rally, the president, distancing himself from the left's boogeyman of Project 2025.
Yeah. And you're not worried about that?
I'm not worried about it. And so I see what he's doing is just very, very conscious, distancing himself from a brand. He's very supportive of what we do. And
so again, this was all put out here. This was made known to everyone. And we've grown accustomed to hearing Trump say, oh, I don't know who he is. I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. Diet Cola, please. Whatever it is he does. But no, there's not a secret version. This was Rob. There wasn't a secret version. This was 7 months ago. This was back in the summer while the campaign was gearing up for the last couple of months, where a camera was snuck into a conversation with Vought, however you put his name, and he pretty much dropped information about what was going on. Now, not safe to say he just said it was a secret, but this is what Trump was, or what they were holding in the back. They weren't making everything fully known, but they were keeping a lot of stuff close to the vest. So some things were coming out that, okay, Trump was denying, oh, I don't know what this is. But as Vought was saying, oh, that's just him playing politics. I mean, you've had, this was before the election. This is what I'm saying. Before the election, right about the time it started coming out. I guess Project 2025 was coming out, and most people had copies of it by late September and around October. But yeah, it was before the election that it was becoming made known. It was actually being released. But again, fair use, fair use. Just a fact, let me go ahead and put up here what Rob was saying here. Wow, just said that. Yep. Again, the idea, it was secret up until the late part of September or early mid-September, and then October it started coming out. Whereas for some reason, think about it, when it started coming out, they were no longer worried about anyone finding out about Project 25. Like, oh well, so what if you know about it? Fair use. I'm going to stop stopping it because there's a lot of buffering.
Know that we have all manner of things that we do that's, even unrelated to Project 2025.
Sure.
Vote has been a mastermind behind expanding the powers of the presidency. Some of those policy proposals Trump has supported, two sources tell CNN. Trump even hosted a Mar-a-Lago fundraiser 2 years ago for the group Vote founded, the right-wing Center for Renewing America.
He's been at our organization. He's raised money for our organization. He's blessed it.
In this hotel suite, Vote thinks he's talking to family members of a wealthy donor. But one is a journalist, the other an actor, working undercover for the UK-based Center for Climate Reporting. The center provided the video to CNN on the condition we blur their faces so they can continue their undercover work. The conversation covers a host of issues, like abortion and how his position differs from Trump.
He talks about rape, incest, and life of the mother. I don't actually believe in those exceptions. I want to get to abolition, but we got to win elections. And so I want to get as far as we possibly can.
His view of who should be an American.
So I want to make sure that we can say we're a Christian nation. And my viewpoint is mostly that I would probably be Christian nationism. That's pretty close to Christian nationalism. If we're going to have legal immigration, can we get people that actually believe in Christianity? Is that something? Or do we have to have, are we not allowed to ask questions about Sharia law?
What could we see America looking like, I guess?
I mean,
in an ideal world.
In an ideal world, I think we could save the country in a sense of, the largest deportation in history.
And even pornography.
We'd have a national ban on pornography if we could, right?
But the most striking of Vote's statements has to do with presidential power.
George Floyd obviously was not about race. It was about destabilizing the Trump administration. Right. It's the left belief that structures in society are the problem. Pulling society down for purposes of revolution is exactly what they want.
I'm sorry, Rob. I said that I try and stopping the video, but you saw that part where they talked about the purpose of revolution. So George Floyd, that wasn't about race. That was about trying to bring down the Trump administration. But yet people seem to forget about the 6th January attack on the Capitol. And you had people talking about, it's revolution, it's revolution. We're taking our country back. But again, this whole bit of disinformation and the mischaracterization of the truth. Ugh. Fair use, fair use.
And what you're seeing in college campuses is a part of that as well. The president has, the ability both along the border and elsewhere to maintain law and order with the military.
A major part of Vote's plan is turning thousands of career federal jobs into political appointments, meaning workers could be fired if they're not sufficiently loyal to Trump.
80% of my time is working on the plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies. I want to be the person that crushes the deep state. I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. It is defunding it, it's impoundment, the ability to not spend money, It's getting rid of their independence.
Even as Vogt talks about the so-called deep state, he claims his group is forming its own to take over on day one.
We are trying to create a shadow Office of Management and Budget, a shadow National Security Council, and a shadow Office of Legal Counsel.
Yeah.
These are the main organs in government that you need outside.
Those anyone?
Battle plan.
And you're not going to publish those?
No.
They go straight to.
Yeah, they're very, very close hold.
Wow, Kyung. Have Vogt or Donald Trump responded to all that was said on this hidden video?
Well, we are, Sarah, beginning to hear from both the Trump campaign and Russell Vogt's organization in response to this video. A spokesperson for Vogt's group is downplaying the video, saying Vogt has spoken about these same topics publicly, telling CNN in a statement, quote, "Thank you for airing our perfect conversation, emphasizing our policy work is totally separate from the Trump campaign." And the Trump campaign tells us only President Trump and the campaign represent policies for the second term. Sarah?
Really?
You don't have to hear me tell it. Oh, so yeah, that's exactly what they said. Or should I say Vought said. He said, well, we're going to create our own deep state. Not a new deep state, but create their own deep state. But the thing is, the deep state, it doesn't exist. But again, remember, if you subscribe to the Lost Cause translation, you can't tell anybody that. They've always been fighting the deep state. Oh, no, yeah, they don't like the deep state, but that didn't mean that they couldn't create their own. And that's what Vought just said. We're going to create our own deep state. But again, man, I put this information up here because I'm sure a majority of people have not even seen that video. A lot of them have not seen that. And what majority of people seem to forget here is that the Republican Party that we see right now, I believe you said that a couple of comments back ago. Matter of fact, let me go back and find that because that would be perfect to back up what I'm getting ready to say right now. Pardon me for a second. Here we go. The modern Republicans try to take credit for the old Republicans while assigning the actions of the old Democrats to the new Democrats. So I want you to keep that in mind here, because as we talk about the old Republicans, and remember, the old Republicans were responsible for freeing the slaves, the radical Republicans. If you recall, maybe 2 videos ago where I talked about that. The radical Republicans were responsible for ensuring the push to get Lincoln to free the slaves. Even though Lincoln was not looking at that as being part of his agenda, it kind of worked out for him, as we know, right? Although it didn't work out for him to see everything reach its fruition because of the assassination. But nonetheless, again, the modern Republicans try to take credit for the old Republicans while assigning the actions of the old Democrats to the new Democrats. Again, I like how that's phrased, that is succinct and to the point, Rob. So keeping that in mind, the ideologies. Let me take this out here for a second. It would be interesting to look at the old Democrats on an individual basis who switched parties during the Atwater era. All right, well, funny you should mention that because I've got something that I'm going to play from the Atwater era. Now, as far as old Democrats, the last ones to leave, I want to say Byrd was probably one of the last ones to leave. I can't recall. It may not have been Byrd, but that's something that I'm going to have to go ahead and see if I can find out. But the most famous of them, again, was Strom Thurmond. But again, he left in 1964. But there were still a few folks who hung around until the complete end of the ideology swap, which was listed as being or mentioned as being 1980. But let's go ahead and talk about this Lee Atwater cat for a second. Now, Lee Atwater was a part of Reagan's cabinet, and he did a lot of writing and put things together for Reagan as far as the ideology, the approach, and everything. But one thing that he was keen on was utilizing the Southern strategy. So we've talked about the Southern strategy before, and the Southern strategy utilized all the way back from 1860, even up to today. In the last election, the Southern strategy was about using racism. So, you know what? Instead of me trying to call this out here, let me go ahead and bring this up real fast. If I can type OUTCR Southern strategy and Britannica. I like Britannica because they are science-based and peer-reviewed. All right, Britannica Southern strategy. Southern strategy in political history of the United States, a campaign strategy of the Republican Party actively pursued from the 1960s. Again, this was also utilized in the 1800s, in the 1860s, but just based on where they're going with it right now, we'll just roll with this, okay? Pursued from the 1960s that initially sought to increase and preserve support from white voters in the South by subtly endorsing racial segregation, racial discrimination, and the disenfranchisement of Black voters. The strategy has also involved directly promoting conservative views on immigration, we're seeing that, taxes, social welfare, programs, law enforcement, and states' rights. Now, the thing to consider here before we look at this Atwater video, the Southern strategy is nothing more than code, all right? We're talking abstract mentioning of particular items that are utilized, or not items, but particular causes that were used to attract Southern whites who had a propensity to endorse racial segregation, racism in itself, discrimination, everything that you see here. But you couldn't come out and say certain things. You had to code it, or again, make it abstract so it did not seem as obvious. All right, keep that in mind. So what I'm going to play for you right now is some of the most racial shit that you're going to hear come out of the Republican Party. Now, Lee Atwater didn't realize that he was being recorded. But again, this is what he had to say about the Southern strategy. Matter of fact, it says Lee Atwater on the Southern strategy. All right. Fair use, fair use.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't hear it. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like force busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconscious.
So sometimes you see the closed caption doesn't work. He was saying that blacks get hurt worse than whites. But back up. Yes, you did hear that. He said ninja, ninja, ninja. Yes, he did say that. So again, you can find this on YouTube. Feel free to go back and listen to it if it sounds muffled or distorted, or if closed caption doesn't catch the words right. But yes, he said that. You can't say ninja, ninja, ninja anymore. Fair use.
Maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
notice how ninja, of course, I'm tired of hearing the word, but notice how ninja just rolled off of his tongue. You can't say ninja, ninja, ninja anymore. And he kind of laughed about it. But this was in 1981. Again, this is that same Republican Party that the Republicans nowadays say, oh, we're for blacks. We're the party of Lincoln. No, you are not. You are nowhere near being the same party that was sponsored by Lincoln. Yep. Again, black people celebrating their own destruction. Rob, make sure that you get this out to people. If they don't see any other video that I put out in the last 2 or 3 months, make sure that you have folks who see this one. I'm probably going to go back and re-edit a few things, or if not, if anything, probably make some more changes to the description to make sure I put the videos that really stick inside of the description. But again, yes, black people celebrating their own destruction. Oh, well, man, I think it's coming up almost at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had no idea that the little bit of material that I gathered would result in such information. But again, Rob, thanks for tagging along. Having the questions and you putting in some additional information kind of helped fill out some of the things that I was talking about. If it wasn't already clear, having you provide some commentary actually made it more clearer, if that's the case. All right, so I see we got other folks showing up here. Well, thanks, folks, but you're getting here a little bit late, but not a problem. That's what the replay is for. Hey, again, appreciate you being here, Rob. Make things go a lot faster, but it also made it a little bit more informative. So if there was anything that I didn't think of, glad to know that you know this aspect of history as well. It helps bring some things to the forefront. Well, folks, I think that's about it. I can't think of anything else that needs to be done. So you know what goes on from here. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what's going on. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. So as always, I want to thank everyone for joining me for this conversation. Until next time, John Henry out. Thanks again, Rob. Boom. Peace.